They know what they're going to do. They didn't even bother really making an argument about why the Constitution requires this result. Neither did John Sauer, right? The lawyer for the federal government. And yes, God, I see your question in the chat. This oral argument was nearly 3 hours. I was losing my mind. Like, at various points, Brett Kavanaugh basically just asked the Solicitor General, tell me we're right. So the Supreme Court heard oral argument in a case that is about the president's ability to fire the heads of multi-member commissions, so administrative agencies within the federal government at will, basically because he disagrees with how they want to implement policy. So there is a near centuries-old decision of the Supreme Court called Humphrey's Executor that upheld a statute that restricted the president's ability to fire the heads of one multi-member commission in particular, the Federal Trade Commission. And after that decision, Humphrey's Executor, of course, Congress made many other agencies independent from the president. Agencies like the National Labor Relations Board, or the Merit Service Protection Board, which administers the civil service laws, or the National Transportation and Safety Board. There are so many different agencies that are independent from the president, and for a good reason. You don't want certain things to be subject to political whim and presidential control, right? Like
Department of Education.
Right. Well, there's
CDC.
a reason.
Sorry.
There's a reason why, even this Supreme Court seems unwilling to give the president near plenary control over the Federal Reserve Board. Right? We don't want interest rates and monetary policy to be made based on what's going to benefit the president politically rather than the long-term economic interests of the country. So anyways, the Supreme Court has been hot to trot on something called the Unitary executive theory for the better part of 4 decades now. The Unitary executive theory is basically fan fiction that emerged in the Ronald Reagan administration, and it maintains that the Constitution requires the president to have all of the executive power. The Constitution says no such thing. But it takes this invented constitutional text to say the president has to have basically plenary control over everyone in the executive branch, has to be able to fire them. So, as a baby lawyer in the administration of Ronald Reagan, John Roberts wrote a memo in 1983, more than 40 years ago, saying the time is right to revisit the constitutional anomaly of so-called independent agencies. He said the time is ripe to put those agencies under presidential control. This is the case that will do so. This is the case that is going to give Donald Trump plenary authority over the heads of every single agency that has thus far been independent within the federal government. And they're going to do it because they want to, because they have been cooking up this theory in their right-wing legal circles, within the Federalist Society and otherwise, for, again, several decades. This is something Project 2025 called on the next Republican administration to ask the Supreme Court to do. This is something Brett Kavanaugh indicated he wanted to do when he was a judge on the Court of Appeals. So they were selecting nominees based on whether they thought these nominees would uphold their ridiculous unitary executive theory, right, and give Republican presidents this sweeping, far-reaching power to basically demolish, the administrative state as we know it and to bend it to their will. It was an insane and crazy-making near 3 hours of oral argument. Like, the Republican appointees we were talking before we went live are so fucking lazy. Like, they know what they're going to do. They didn't even bother really making an argument about why the Constitution requires this result. Neither did John Sauer, right? The lawyer for the federal government. And yes, God, I see your question in the chat. This oral argument was nearly 3 hours. I was losing my mind. Like, at various points, Brett Kavanaugh basically just asked the Solicitor General, tell me we're right. Right? Tell me we're right that the Federal Reserve Board is just different. Tell me we're right that the Constitution actually does vest all of the executive power in the president. And John Sauer was like, yes, you're doing amazing, sweetie. Everything you say is awesome and right. It was just embarrassing. And what was even more embarrassing is The Republican justices and the Trump administration are asking for the Supreme Court to change the law. They're asking the Supreme Court to establish a new rule that will say the president has to have the authority to fire anyone exercising significant executive power. But they refuse to say who else will exercise significant executive power besides the heads of these multi-member commissions who the president has to be able to fire. Right? Like Justice Kagan said, well, what about inferior officers, right? The people who aren't the heads of these agencies, but the people underneath them. John Sauer said, well, we're not challenging those. To which Justice Sotomayor said, no shit, right? Like, not yet, but you will after this case. Justice Sotomayor asked, well, what about the Court of Federal Claims? What about the tax court? Again, unwilling to say whether they are going to argue during the next round that those agencies also have to be subject to presidential control. It was crazy making and unreal.
This is their king. This is their daddy. They're giving him expansive control for people who think we're nutty and crazy. You're not paying attention. Trust the evidence of your ears and your eyes. Most of the legal eagles that I follow on Blue Sky, like Leah, were like, wow, this is even more egregious than the last egregious attempt because they're not even hiding. They're not even I'm old enough to remember, Leah, that they used to at least attempt to do a dog whistle. They used to at least try. They used to put effort. Now they're just saying, especially after Donald Trump got away with committing all these crimes, and especially after Trump v. United States, where they said absolute immunity, now the Supreme Court is saying, we could do whatever we want. What are you going to do? What you going to do? That's what I saw today. What you going to do to stop us? And then the hypocrisy doesn't work either because you're seeing this hypocrisy against immigrants and criminals, but he's literally pardoning criminals as he's talking about crime. He's literally pardoning drug traffic, literally, folks, pardoning a drug trafficker as he's talking about extrajudicially killing Venezuelans. And now I see it as they're saying, well, we told President Biden he doesn't have the power to forgive student loans. No, no, no. But we're just going to pretend that you didn't listen to us. And even if you did listen to us, we don't give a shit. And because Trump is Republican, he can do whatever he wants. Did I get this right? Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. And this was, again, so many crazy making things about this argument. But, one thing you might say is, well, okay, at least when the Supreme Court makes this new rule, it's going to allow Democratic presidents, right, to be able to do what they want with agencies because Democratic presidents, they're going to be able to fire people and replace them like with the people they want. No, 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 says the Supreme Court. They made that clear in this oral argument. They still have this thing called the major questions doctrine, which they made up in their back pocket. What's the major questions doctrine? It's this invented rule that they said they will interpret statutes not to allow administrative agencies to do things that trigger them and the Republican Party, which basically means Democratic administrations can't have agencies in Democratic administrations do big, significant things. You're right. They invented the major questions doctrine, and then they said that means President Biden and his Department of Education, they can't forgive student loans. But guess what? Donald Trump and Linda McMahon can do. They can demolish the entire Department of Education that Congress created by statute, even though Congress didn't authorize the president to do that because apparently to them, that's no big deal. And so they keep this card in their back pocket, which they will again play during Democratic administrations to say, yeah, Democrats, like you can pick whoever you want to run the agencies, but you can't actually do anything you want to do with those agencies because we won't let you.
Folks, they're showing you the end game, right? In clear sight. Two questions in the 5 minutes I have with you, because I'm trying my best to you get as much of your brain as possible. This Supreme Court said, hey, Texas, go ahead and gerrymander. It's all good. But here we have in California, they actually put it to the people, 65-35. What's the Supreme Court going to do?
I cannot begin to convey how embarrassing and hackish their decision in the Texas case was. A trial judge who was appointed by Donald Trump concluded that Texas's map was an illegal racial gerrymander. And he didn't have to make that case because Donald Trump's Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights, Harmeet Dillon, wrote it down in a memo, right? She wrote a letter to Texas that said, hey, guys, erase these majority-minority districts. Erase these minority coalition districts where minority voters actually have political power. So they told Texas to target districts based on race. That is illegal. And yet the Supreme Court said, nope, This is fine because the district court did not give the Texas legislature, which, by the way, is engaging in mid-cycle redistricting in order to defeat democracy, they didn't give the Texas legislature the presumption of good faith. Right? Basically, it is illegal and wrong to suggest that Texas is engaged in racial discrimination against racial minorities. But at the same time, they have before them this case out of Louisiana where they are very likely to say, you know what is illegal racial discrimination? When Louisiana tries to comply with the Voting Rights Act and ensure that minority voters are represented. That's illegal racial discrimination, right? Trying to actually make the country a multiracial democracy. But it's not illegal racial discrimination to gerrymander the fuck out of Texas to give Republicans an electoral advantage and to try to make it impossible for Democrats to win office. Like, it is appalling and shocking, again, how lazy and hypocritical they feel empowered to be. So what are they going to do in the California case? I don't know. Right, you have Justice Alito's separate statement that suggested, well, California's, that map was definitely also drawn for partisan aims, not racial aims, and therefore it's fine. I would not put it past those guys that they will invalidate California's map and say, those map
Absolutely.
makers, they were trying to actually empower racial minorities. That's racial discrimination.
And folks, if you think Leah's not on point, I want to remind you that this court says we hate DEI. Race should not be seen as a factor in affirmative action. We live in a colorblind society. And then through the emergency docket, Kavanaugh is like, oh, ICE, go ahead and racially profile in California. They don't care because the Constitution in them is Play-Doh. They don't give a shit, folks. Do you see? Do you understand finally? All the people who said, but the institutions watch, but the guardrails, all the people told this to me last year, Leah. I was like, they don't care. Now you're seeing it. And the 3 minutes I have left, can you please educate me about this thing called birthright citizenship?
Oh, of course.
Because truly, it is very vague to me about, I mean, surely the Supreme Court will really wrestle with birthright citizenship. I mean, it's not like it's directly mentioned in the Constitution of the 14th Amendment, Leah. So I'm assuming this is going to be 5-4 case, 7-3. I mean, it's 7-2, really tough, right?
Yeah. So you know how the Constitution doesn't say that the president has all of the executive power and gets to fire everyone he wants? Well, it actually does say all persons born and naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the states and of the United States. Donald Trump has basically said, nah, right? I would like to say not so, at least for certain people, right, who are born to people of color, right, in the United States and who are born to people without legal authorization to be in the United States or who are here temporarily. This is a wildly illegal, brazenly illegal policy. But like, this court is so nuts, right? We can't rule out the possibility that this opinion actually isn't unanimous against the administration. And that is a mark of just how much this institution has fallen, right? And just how little of a safeguard it provides. Because now the question is like, okay, is it going to be 7-2, 6-3, 5-4? Like, which of these wingnuts is going to say, actually, the president can deny birthright citizenship to people, right, in blatant violation of the text of the Constitution, the perfectly clear legislative history, by the way. Like, when the Reconstructionists in Congress were proposing this amendment and debating it, people were like, hey, this is going to give citizenship to the children of immigrants. And everyone was like, yeah, you're right, it will. And then they passed it, right? Like, period. Nothing else. And yet, so like one of two things is going to happen. It's going to be a split decision, and like one of the wingnuts on the court is going to embrace one of these like wild racist xenophobic theories about why the president can deny birthright citizenship. They're going to liken the children of undocumented migrants to like an invading army, right? That's one thing. Second is, to the extent, or like when, I think the court is going to invalidate the order. I don't know whether it's unanimous. They're going to use this to launder absolutely everything they have done to enable Donald Trump up to this
Yep.
point by saying,
Yep.
look at this great thing we did. We
Yep.
stood up for the principle of birthright
Yep.
citizenship. Therefore, we were totally okay to allow him to send people to third countries and disappear them, right? We were totally okay to allow him to fire all of these officials in violation of federal law. We were totally okay to allow him to deny millions in research grants. The list goes on. It's not okay. right? Like the mere fact that they are willing to uphold the plain text, perfectly clear history of the Constitution does not make any of the things they have done to enable Donald Trump's abuses all right.
My optimist in me says that Donald Trump will lose on this by 6-3. And my optimist says, which is like you, a cynic, because I have old man memory. I remember that with Obamacare, they used that for a good decade. We don't need reform. We saved Obamacare.
Yep.
Even though we now have allowed Donald Trump to literally dismantle this country through what Sotomayor said in her dissent, right? This administration has the Supreme Court on speed dial.
Yep.
Last thing before you go, I've kept you for 15 minutes. I want to honor your time. I know you're exhausted. I have long said, and I'll say again, that this is a generational moment that needs generational change. I believe the water is warm. I believe if someone, the
Neil
message is
Gorsuch said that in today's oral argument, but he used it to invite the
for,
Solicitor General to blow up the administrative
yeah,
state.
yeah, but
Sorry.
I'm using it for the goodness.
Yeah.
I'm flipping it. Uh, it's time for some Democrat to say, "All right, mother effers, I'm running on reforming and expanding the
Yes.
Supreme Court."
Yes.
I remember what FDR did. You sons of bitches. He came out big guns blazing, and he got you all scared. You all bent the knee and allowed the New Deal to go. F you. You're not going to do what you're going to do. I'm going to run on this. I'm going to message on this. Mamdani ran on affordability. It's impossible. Now it's popular. Affordable health care. It's impossible. Now it's possible. Living wage. On and on and on. Professor Lippman, isn't this the time? Like, what else do we need to see?
Look, no matter what issue you care about, you should be a Supreme Court voter. If you care about voting rights, you need to reform the Supreme Court so that you can actually enforce laws prohibiting racial discrimination in voting. So you could enforce a law that might ban partisan gerrymandering. If you're an environmental voter, right, you are a Supreme Court voter because this Supreme Court doesn't allow democratic administrations to address climate change. If you are, right, an economic inequality voter, you are a Supreme Court voter because the Supreme Court nuked, Donald or Joe Biden's plan for student debt relief, right? They have unleashed dark money in our elections. No matter what issue you care about, you are a Supreme Court voter, right? And those weirdos should not have the ability to run our country for the next several decades. I do not want that world. I don't think anyone wants that world.
I'm saying expand the court. That's me. I don't want Professor Lippman to lose her job. Okay, Aaliyah, do something that we're terrible at. Please shamelessly promote yourself before you fall asleep.
So you can hear me on a podcast I co-host called Strict Scrutiny with a few other law professors. New episodes drop every Monday, and you can also get a copy of my book, Lawless: How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes, where in the final chapter, I actually talk about John Roberts as a baby lawyer in the Reagan administration and how even then he really wanted to nuke independent agencies and give the president power over them. Seeds were there. This is a long-term right-wing legal project. We all saw it coming. So get it
December
wherever you
8th,
can support independent bookstores.
December 8th, 2025, he got it done. And speaking about John Roberts, he always had the wet dream of dismantling the Voting Rights Act, and voila, got that done as well. A final quick question just before you leave. Those who say, well, John Roberts and a few of these other people are moderates. Are they moderates? I just want this zombie narrative to
No,
die.
no,
Thank you.
they are not.
They are not, folks. Thank you all for joining. Leah is exhausted. You've seen the yawns. She's been going, but she made time for us. And I kept her 3 minutes extra. I said only 15 minutes, but she was on a roll. Thanks so much. For those who joined us late, this will be up live on my Substack and Leah's Substack. Break it down. She broke it down in 18 minutes. I think these three cases, what's happening right now, folks. What more do you need to see? Be kind, be informed, and please, oh, please don't be a fascist. And buy Leah's book. It's fantastic. I'm not just saying it, I've actually read it. Thank you all. Take care. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you. Take care.